Hi everyone, it's me, Tim. Today I want to talk about game rights. Specifically, who owns the rights to games that you're playing and how the individuals who worked on those games, what they own and what they don't own. And as usual, I want to talk to you first about why I'm doing this video. A frequently asked question or comment that I get on this channel, I'm asked to review games. And sometimes people couch it as, I just wanted you to give your thoughts on this game. It could be a game that has just come out, which is very frequent. A game that is similar to a game I've made in the past. Or even sometimes people send me links to their own published games. Sometimes they want to send me a design document and say, can I get your feedback on this? There are many reasons I do not do this. In fact, I made a video about it called Why I Don't Review Games, and I'll link it below. I needed that video because I get asked so frequently. It is my most frequently linked video in one of my own response comments that I've ever done. And people know not to take it personally because they asked me a question and I have a video that I made almost 2 years ago that addresses it. So they know this is not me telling them no personally. It's me just saying, no, I don't do that. I've decided I need one to talk about how legal rights to game IPs work. And I know I say IP a lot. It stands for intellectual property. It kind of covers everything about a game, how it looks, how it plays. I did address this in a video called Frequently Asked Questions, which I'll link below. But people miss that because it's buried in about 8 different questions I answer. So I decided I'll make a video specifically for game rights. And then when people ask me questions about, hey, do I ask you for permission for this? How do I make something that connects to a game you made? They know what to do. Also, I just think it's cool for many of you to understand how the game development industry works from a legal point of view. So I will try to keep a lot of legal terms out of this, but I'm going to try to explain at a very high level what it means to be in the game development industry and what kind of rights you have. The other reason I'm doing this is people think I make a ton of money from Fallout. This happened when Fallout 3 came out. This happened when Fallout 4 came out, Fallout New Vegas, none of which I worked on. It recently happened when the Fallout TV show came out. People were literally leaving comments like, dude, you're probably driving a Lamborghini right now. Which, by the way, if you know me in cars, there's just so much wrong in that statement, I can't even begin to address it. But let me just tell you, look, I was on a team of people who made the original Fallout, and I was an employee of a company. So I was being paid a salary, and then after the game shipped, I got a bonus. Usually you get one bonus and then you don't get anything more. And that's it. There's no money paid out based on how well it's selling. Interplay owned the rights to Fallout, and years after I left, they sold those rights to Bethesda. I wasn't getting anything after the game shipped, and after I left Interplay, and after they sold the rights to Bethesda. Nothing. Which means you have to go to Bethesda for anything about Fallout. But this also frequently comes up with Arcanum. People assume that I, or me, Leonard, and Jason, the 3 owners of Troika, own all of Arcanum. And we don't. In fact, very recently, at least when I'm making this, but you'll of course see this a couple months later, someone asked me for permission to make a tabletop role-playing game in the Arcanum setting. And I had to explain that I don't own the rights to the Arcanum IP. I can't grant those. It's confusing where they are. Sierra owned it, and then Havas, and then Activision, and now Microsoft. You have to ask somebody at Microsoft. And I understand that people go, well, you own Troika, and Troika made Arcanum, so shouldn't you own the IP? No, the publisher did. Because that's frequently how those deals are made. You approach a publisher, and the publisher's like, well, what am I going to get out of this? And I'll talk about that in a minute, about what publishers may ask for. Now, what confuses this is I do own the code to Arcanum. I recently recompiled it. I recently made it into a Windows 10 native game, and with updated DirectX and all that. People misunderstand that. I can't use it to make an Arcanum 2. I can't give it away to people. The contract specifically prevents me from doing that. Why did we keep the rights? Well, I can and did use it to make another game. Temple of Elemental Evil sits on Arcanum's code. And just as a quick explanation of how this is happening, this is exactly the same thing I did with GNOL and TIG, the two operating system abstraction libraries. And I'll link a video below. It would be a whole video to talk about what those are. But basically, they made it so when we were making Fallout, we didn't have to think about DOS, because Fallout was originally a DOS game. We just wrote calls into GNOL, and GNOL redirected them to the appropriate DOS API. We did the same thing. Well, later GNOL we made a Windows version, and then suddenly Fallout worked on Windows because the calls into GNOL, instead of going to DOS, went to Windows. There was a programmer, Chris DeSalvo, who went home for a weekend at Interplay and came back with a Mac version of GNOL. And about 90% of it was working, and suddenly we had a Mac version of Fallout. It was really cool. Well, guess what? I learned a lot from that, how powerful that one decision was early on in Fallout. So I did Arcanum in a similar way. There was an OS abstraction library called TIG, but also the engine and the mechanics were kept separate. So the engine might ask things like, what's the distance between these two people? Do they have line of sight with each other? Can I pick up this item? And then the mechanics part of the library would answer those questions, but those were kept separate, which meant when we made Temple, we could throw away all the Arcanum system mechanics and replace them with D&D 3.5. And now we've got a game running using D&D 3.5. Now, we did a lot more. We completely changed how the sprites work. They have 3D sprites in Temple, so there were smooth rotations and much smoother walking animations. But in general, the engine handled everything that wasn't a game, that was not game unique. And then there was a game library that handled game unique stuff. And then both of those sat on top of this OS abstraction library, so neither of them knew what kind of machine they were running on. Whew, that was a long explanation. So the short of it is, I do own Arcanum's code. I can't use it to do anything Arcanum related because Sierra owned the IP. So let's talk about rights specifically. In general, if you want to know who owns the rights to something, you follow the money. And by that I mean who paid for the game, or who paid for most of the game. And at least how I made games, this was usually a publisher. They paid most, if not all, of the cost of making the game. Now, if the developer pays some of it, then they can keep some of the rights. Sometimes they get to keep the IP. A little less often, they get to keep art that was used in it, so they can reuse it in their other games as long as they significantly change it. Sometimes they get to keep the code. That's what happened with Troika. We got to keep the code, even though Sierra paid for the development of Arcanum. That often comes with caveats, like I can't give the code out, I can't use the code to make an Arcanum game. They also got rights for the sequel. So we couldn't have gone and made a sequel somewhere else because the publisher reserved that. I get to do that. These can get very complicated, by the way. Sometimes they ask for first right of refusal. Like if you go to make a game with someone, they want to be asked first, and only if they say no can you go to someone else. Sometimes they ask for last right of refusal, meaning you can talk to everybody you want, but you have to go to them last. Very complex. Please, I beg you, if you ever think about going to game development on your own, please get a lawyer. Don't think, I'm smart, I'll figure this out. Especially don't think, my cousin Vinny's smart, her figure it out for me. Please, please find a lawyer who specializes in this, because the publishers have done this a lot. You'd be well served by a lawyer who knows what he's doing. Anyway, so by this time, people are probably going, well, what can I do to own it all? I want to own it all. I made this game. I want to own it all. Well, the simplest answer is pay for it all. You pay for it all, you own it all. The moment anyone else does something, especially if they give you money, or if they work for you for free, you may be giving away some of the rights to your game. If you want to, think of it as if you want to own it, pay some. If you want to own some, pay some. You want to own it all, pay it all. Note that even if you pay for some of it, you are then going to concede something. With Arcanum, we gave up the IP but kept the code. Publishers almost always want the revenue stream. They control the money coming in, and then you get a portion of that. As I mentioned, they often want to control rights for sequels. Now, of course, you can always be a solo indie developer. I know nothing about that, so I'm not really going to address that. But that is a way for you to go forward and own all the rights. But in general, most of the people you see in the publisher developer world are employees or contractors that are doing work for hire, back when WFH meant that and not work from home, and they don't really have any rights to the stuff they're making. I guess that brings me to the last point, which is when I told people I was thinking about retiring, most of them were shocked. They didn't know how I was doing this, especially because, like them, I never made a big chunk of money from my games outside of my salary and whatever that bonus was we got. And all I can say is my retirement was funded primarily by 44 years of working and saving as much of my salary and bonuses as I could. Actually, I shouldn't say 44 years because the first 3 years of Troika, they were a negative. It's odd to think that I made the least amount of money in my career when I look back over it when I started my own company, but that's what it's like. That's the risk you take when you start a company. And it's weird, and this, for my non-American viewers, like all Americans, I'm saving money hoping that I have saved enough to last me until I die, which hopefully will be many decades from now, and hopefully will happen by being crushed by a runaway semi-truck driven by the Incredible Hulk. Anyway, that's kind of how game rights work. That's how people in the industry tend to make their money. And I hope this kind of explains it all and explains why I don't have permission to grant any kind of rights to any of my games because I don't own them. So anyway, I hope this answers any questions people are asking me about Fallout, Arcanum, or any other games I worked on. Bye.